Our aircraft is making its final descent toward Frankfurt Airport, an aviation heavyweight, wrestling to retain its status as one of Europe's busiest hubs. As we make our way through the clouds, take a moment to gaze out your window at the construction below, part of a multi-billion-dollar effort to keep this airport competitive for the future of aviation. 4 billion euros are being invested into a brave new terminal, longer runways, and extensive infrastructure upgrades. But this is no ordinary renovation project. Frankfurt is building and betting on a future where air travel continues growing rapidly amidst climate change and economic instability. Frankfurt Airport is making a risky bet that having larger aircraft with greater numbers of travelers and freight will allow the airport to keep making money, no matter what economic or environmental problems happen in the future. Many German companies support expanding Frankfurt Airport because it is so important for exports and business in Europe. But there are ongoing debates about the airport taking over green spaces nearby. Plans for how the airport can handle rising seas and heat due to climate change are still being finished. First, let's look at the new runways being built. Frankfurt Airport's existing infrastructure is outdated and straining at max capacity. Built to handle 30 million passengers in the 1970s, the airport surpassed 70 million annual travelers in recent years. And with demand for aviation projected to keep climbing, expansion became necessary to avoid costly delays and congestion as early as 2025. The planned upgrades through 2026 are ambitious and expensive, almost doubling available terminal space and adding a third runway. We'll soon explore the terminals, but first let's fly by the literal foundation of any airport, the runway. At nearly 3 kilometers long, Frankfurt's new landing strip will allow simultaneous takeoffs and landings while accommodating new longer-range aircraft. Supporters claim the runway also utilizes latest noise reduction engineering to minimize impact on nearby communities. The centerpiece Terminal 3 totals over 210,000 m2, larger than 30 soccer pitches. With automated passenger processing, expanded luxury retail options, and room for jumbo jet aircraft like Airbus A380s, the ultra-modern complex aims to handle up to 25 million additional passengers per year. This expanded capacity would cement Frankfurt's status as Germany's largest airport and one of Europe's dominant hubs. Projections suggest the airport could eventually eclipse airports in rival cities like Amsterdam to become the third busiest in Europe after London Heathrow and Paris CDG. Frankfurt Airport's big expansion plans depend on air travel continuing to grow very fast for many years. But some question if this will really happen given climate change, high oil prices, and economic instability after COVID. Let's examine why local leaders support spending billions to upgrade. Officials and German companies say bigger airports nearby are expanding, so Frankfurt must also grow to stay competitive. If not, they warn airlines and flyers will go elsewhere. Studies estimate the expansion will add 20 billion euro to the local economy and 20,000 jobs over time. This seems realistic since Frankfurt Airport already has over 80,000 workers and brings in tens of billions yearly even before expanding. Upgrading the airport aims to bring in more international travelers who could fly via other hubs like Paris or Zurich instead. More visitors would also spend money at Frankfurt's shops and restaurants. In summary, officials think failing to expand will hurt Frankfurt's status as a key European airport, decreasing flights, cargo, jobs, and tourism. However, some economists question if economic gains outweigh social and environmental costs that come with large expansion projects. Let's next look at how increased flights and construction might impact local habitats and emissions. Environmental groups strongly oppose Frankfurt Airport expanding, worried about more noise, air pollution, and cutting down a 500-year-old forest. Even with modern green building plans, more runways and terminals mean increased flights, jet fuel use, and greenhouse gas emissions that worsen climate change. By allowing 20 million more passenger trips yearly, critics say the airport pushes society to keep depending on fossil fuels rather than Germany's clean energy goals. Aviation already produces 2 to 3% of human-caused CO2, and unrestrained airport expansions would exponentially increase emissions. There are also risks that new runways and terminals could harm forests, wetlands, and meadows vital for nature and biodiversity. While officials demanded environmental impact reviews, conservation plans are seen as inadequate to offset the damage. Activists point to past failed promises when airports expanded. More flights enabled by Frankfurt's growth could additionally worsen air quality issues the airport already broke EU rules for. Though modern planes are cleaner, more air traffic means more lung-damaging emissions. Residents close to the airport are similarly dismayed about noise impacts from increased flights, despite the promised soundproofing of schools and homes. Yet proponents argue that advanced navigation systems will concentrate flight paths over less populated areas and reduce the total number of citizens exposed to aircraft noise. They also pledge state-of-the-art noise reduction technologies on the new runway and buffering green spaces around expanded terminals. We turn now to our final leg, assessing whether Frankfurt's airport expansion makes prudent economic sense given high costs and an uncertain future for aviation. All travelers remember the huge disruptions to airports worldwide during the COVID-19 pandemic. Frankfurt was no exception, with lockdowns and testing rules leading passenger numbers and airport income to plunge. One report shows Frankfurt's traffic dropped from 70 million to just 18 million in 2020, wiping out billions in revenue. Although some recovery occurred in 2022, worries continue about new virus variants and potential future travel restrictions. Some experts, skeptical of air travel rebounding, think Frankfurt's predictions to reach 100 million passengers by 2030 seem overly optimistic. There are also big questions around whether people will fly as much, given increasing climate change concern. Spurred by activists like Greta Thunberg, public sentiment against frequent flyers grows alongside calls for aviation fuel taxes. This rising environmental awareness could dampen flight demand for decades ahead. Moreover, some economists see air travel stabilizing as video conferencing substitutes for post-pandemic business meetings. Analysts argue Frankfurt's pre-COVID growth was already slowing, implying expanded facilities may prove excessive. Critics additionally highlight financial instability. Billions in cost overruns have already ballooned expansion price tags. More delays or engineering issues could further raise expenditures. Yet such pessimism is hand-waved by Frankfurt's operating company, Fraport AG. They insist that over the long term, air travel will keep expanding at pace. Pointing to the airport's geographical advantages, Fraport, the sheer scale of commitments already made to the project also generates inertia to see it through. So in light of all financials, forecasts, and intangibles tied to this issue, is Frankfurt Airport's big bet on expansion a solid wager or an imprudent gamble given the uncertainties that lie ahead? The truth lies somewhere between optimistic and cautious views on aviation growth. Big infrastructure projects always carry calculated risks and uncertainty. There are also debates balancing economic needs, environmental justice, and community well-being that people weigh differently. Still, amidst unknowns, Frankfurt Airport's expansion shows how transportation hubs can lock societies into long-term travel patterns that impact the planet. Before COVID, aviation emissions were already rising exponentially as airports globally chased higher passenger and cargo volumes. If policymakers want to reduce aviation's outsized carbon footprint, limiting airport expansions merits consideration despite some economic downsides. In this context, some argue investments could instead go to decarbonize existing assets through renewable jet fuels, electrification, and efficiency. Others say government funds could expand high-speed rail to curb demand for short-haul flights within Europe. Airport officials counter they are pursuing sustainability through minimal new land use, noise reduction, and enabling public transit access. But such efforts pale next to the sheer climate impact of facilitating 200,000 more annual flights. Frankfurt Airport's expansion essentially bets big on strong continued growth for international air travel. But it's also a high-risk gamble, assuming aviation will keep booming despite climate change, bankruptcies, and future pandemics, any of which could halt passenger demand regardless of new facilities.